Want to welcome everybody to the Carolina Canopy webinar series this morning. Talk's going to be on spotted lanternfly, a threat to North Carolina landscapes, with presenter Whitney Swink. Whitney, if you want to go ahead, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If you want to go ahead and start sharing yours, I'll wait till your presentation is up before introducing you.
Sounds good. All right.
All right, looks good on my end. So good morning. So today's presenter is Whitney Swink. Whitney is the state entomologist for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. She earned her bachelor's of science degree in biology from the College of William and Mary and a master's degree in entomology from NC State. She began her career with NCDA about 10 years ago, working at the Beneficial Insects Lab as a research specialist. And in her time with the Department of Ag, she has worked on a number of invasive species, invasive insect issues, such as the emerald ash borer, European gypsy moth, walnut twig beetle, and the spotted lanternfly. In her role, she works with pests of regulatory concern to the forests, landscapes, and to agriculture. And she is going to talk today about the spotted lanternfly. With that, Whitney, it's your turn to go.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Leslie, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to go into detail about a new emerging pest, the spotted lanternfly. On my title slide, I have agriculture highlighted in orange, and part of that is because I've given this talk a lot, but to different audiences. And so spotted lanternfly is a threat to agriculture, landscapes, forests, kind of everything. I will be focusing this talk much more directly towards urban foresters, since that's what you guys all are. But unfortunately, this is a pest of great concern to a lot of aspects of the environment and honestly just human daily life. So with that, I'll kind of start going into what it actually is. So I tend to always start with this quote from Julie Urban. And let me really quickly move the participant thing off the screen. Okay. So I attended, gosh, at this point about a year and a half ago, a meeting of concerned scientists in Charlotte, North Carolina, actually, and Julie Urban, who's an entomologist at Penn State University, described spotted lanternfly as a freak among plant hoppers. And for some reason, this quote has just really stuck with me because as we've had multiple years now with this pest, every time the researchers think they've understood it and are really getting a grasp on it, it does something different that is confusing and strange, and it's just proving to be a very tricky insect. So what it actually is, it is a plant hopper. It's a true bug. It's a member of the family Fulgoridae. There's not very many. I think actually spotted lanternfly is the only known pest in this insect family. So it's pretty rare to have such an extreme pest in a tending to be non-pest family. As with many of our invasive insects, it is native to parts of Asia, specifically northern China, Vietnam, Bangladesh. Unfortunately, in 2004, it did get introduced into Korea and has become a major pest there, mostly in grapes and peaches. It was also introduced into Japan. Fast forward to 2014, unfortunately, it was detected in Pennsylvania and sadly has already spread into Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, part of Virginia, part of West Virginia. Thankfully not here yet, but we think it's only a matter of time. Spotted lanternfly is univoltine, which means it has one life cycle per year. And one of the reasons it's such a major pest is because of its incredibly broad host range. And I will go into much more detail about that as we get further in. Leslie, I don't have the chat up, by the way. And so if there's a question that you see that I should be addressing right away, feel free to just interrupt me.
Okay, will do. I'll keep an eye on it.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the life cycle, I mentioned that it only has one generation per year. It overwinters in the egg stage, and the eggs are very cryptic. Obviously, these are quite zoomed in photos. The egg masses themselves are about an inch in size, so roughly quarter size. The photo on the left that you see is a freshly laid egg mass, and essentially a female lays about 35 eggs and then covers it with this kind of mud-like foam. I don't know how else to describe it. And in this photo, you can actually see some of the eggs. I don't know if my mouse is showing up to all of you, but some eggs poking out at the top. And then that photo on the right is what a hatched egg mass looks like. This photo, well, all these photos are from Pennsylvania, but we took that photo on a trip that we took last summer. So the females have an interesting behavior. They, up in the more northern states, appear to go through 2 egg laying phases. So they'll basically do this interesting behavior where they segregate from the males, they'll aggressively feed for a while, come together and mate, lay an egg mass, then they'll segregate again, go feed some more, come together, mate, lay another egg mass. A lot of the researchers suspect it's possible that there could be a 3rd egg laying phase here in North Carolina just because of our warmer climate, but since it's not here yet, it's a little too early to tell. And I should have pointed out when I was on the previous couple slides, all of these month ranges that you'll see on this life cycle are based on Pennsylvania. And so it's pretty certain that you can essentially shift 30 days ahead. So October to June would actually be like September to June for egg masses, potentially even end of August because we are just so much warmer here. So you can adjust accordingly. I always include this photo. I don't know how many of you are familiar with gypsy moth. I imagine as urban foresters you are. This is just an excellent photo showing a spotted lanternfly egg mass laid directly above a gypsy moth egg mass. So if you are familiar with gypsy moth, similar in appearance, very cryptic, small, usually laid on smooth surfaces. In this case, you can actually see the female in the kind of upper left of this photo who's just laid her egg mass and is moving off. Color is the main difference, and also gypsy moth egg masses are kind of hairy, fuzzy, whereas the spotted lanternfly egg mass is going to be much smoother. This is the life stage that will be the hardest to detect if you don't know what you're looking for and are not actively seeking it out, simply because they're highly camouflaged, both right after being laid and post-hatch. Spotted lanternfly does have 4 nymphal or instar stages. The first 3, I would not expect anyone to really notice. They're quite small. That first one is about the size of a tick. The main way you could tell it apart from a tick is if you go to try and touch it, it will hop away because it is a plant hopper. They are basically black with a few white spots, but they look like a lot of other true bugs. So again, I wouldn't expect anyone to see that and really know what they were looking at. However, the 4th instar becomes much more noticeable. And here in North Carolina, right now, if it were here, this is the stage I would expect people to be seeing right now. It is about 1/2 inch in size, bright red. They've begun to develop little wing buds, which you can see in this bottom photo. They've got white polka dots. They're very bold. If they're around, they'd be kind of hard to miss if you were actively looking. And those we suspect, so it says May for hatch. Again, that's for Pennsylvania. We were up at a meeting back in March before the lockdown started, and they actually think hatch could begin as early as March here in North Carolina. So again, something to consider. And then the adults. This is the life cycle, the stage that everyone would definitely notice. Spotted lanternfly is actually a pretty large insect. It's a little over an inch, about an inch to a little over an inch in size. The top photo you see on the right is what you're most likely to see. They're very poor flyers, and so that spread winged image that you're seeing, you're not gonna, that would be very rare to see, even though those bright red underwings would be quite noticeable. The reason they look kind of pinkish on that top photo is because of that bright red shining through. The adults are active for quite a long time. As I mentioned, they go through a multiple egg laying phase where they'll separate, come together, separate, come together, and they'll persist well into winter. Here in North Carolina, who knows, possibly even into January with how warm our winters can be, but it's just too early to tell since thankfully this pest is still not here yet. So that's pretty much the life cycle, giving you an idea of when you would expect to see spotted lanternfly, but why are we actually so concerned with it? What's the big deal about this pest? Well, I alluded earlier to the host range. Unfortunately, spotted lanternfly has a very broad host range. To date, over 70 species of woody plants have been identified as a host of spotted lanternfly. And host here is kind of a tricky word. The instars, so those nymphal stages, are much more generalist. They'll feed on just about anything. The adults tend to be more I guess, discerning about what they want to feed on. But as you can see on this list, those are all things adults have fed on. So you've got apples, birch trees, cherry, stone fruits, grapes, so the wine industry could be affected, hops, so the beer industry could be affected, maples, one of our most beautiful landscape trees, urban trees, poplars, walnut, willow. And then you'll notice, wait a minute, tree of heaven is on this list. I imagine most of you are familiar with Tree of Heaven, but I have had some people, when I've given this talk, who just aren't really aware of what this tree is. So on the chance there's a few of you here, I want to really quickly cover it because Tree of Heaven is spotted lanternfly's favorite food. And I cannot stress enough how much it loves this. They will choose a stump of Tree of Heaven over a full-grown tree if it's Tree of Heaven and say maples are around, which could be a good thing, but sadly, not necessarily stopping things because Tree of Heaven is everywhere. So these two photos are classic appearance of Tree of Heaven. It's really, really common along highways. I know, again, most people have probably seen it and not realize what they were looking at. It's allelopathic. So it sends out a chemical in the surrounding areas, basically kind of limiting what else can grow, which is why it's able to spread so easily. It is also an invasive pest from Asia. I think was planted, I want to say sometime in the 1800s intentionally, and sadly has really grown out of control. In the summer, the females produce bright yellow samaras. We'll start to see those. Might already be seeing some now. They have very smooth bark, often described as resembling cantaloupe skin. Their leaves are quite long, up to 1 foot to 4 feet in length. They are compound leaves, of course. And the leaflets, if you see on this right photo, if you flip it over, they'll have these 2 little glands at the base. And if you take a leaf and crinkle it up, it will smell like burnt peanut butter. It's quite disgusting. You'll know immediately. And then, of course, they have this really nice heart-shaped leaf scar. So those are some really good kind of key features you can look for if you have not been familiar with Tree of Heaven yet and want to start kind of noticing where it is in the landscape, because this, knowing where Tree of Heaven is going to be really helpful for us determining where spotted lanternfly could and will become a problem. And I included this. This is actually kind of a new discovery. It's unclear yet if Tree of Heaven is actually required for spotted lanternfly to complete its life cycle. It's seeming like that's the case, but apparently they've been looking at research coming out of Korea where the pest has been established longer, and it seems like they are able to complete their life cycle on Chinaberry in Korea. And Eastern North Carolina has a lot of Chinaberry, so we haven't been hearing this from other northern states in the United States that have this, but it's something that is now on our radar as a just in case. So I just included that as kind of an additional thing. And other plants that I had not mentioned that this pest feeds on, weird thing, poison ivy is one of them, Virginia creeper. I've seen photos of it on blueberries, peppers. I'll show you a video further in this talk where it's on grasses. It's crazy the stuff that these insects will feed on. And I want to really briefly touch again on the maples. So there have been some interesting stuff coming out of Pennsylvania of what they're calling hot trees. And essentially, these are, it's not species specific, it's tree specific. You could have a beautiful road lined with maples that have been, planted, and one of those maples will just be covered in spotted lanternfly. I mean, clearly there's something about that one tree that they love. They'll ignore all the others. They still can't figure out what's happening here, but that is why they've deemed them hot trees. They are attractive for some reason to the spotted lanternfly. So that's something, as you're out and about doing your jobs, to be on the lookout for. As I learn more, we'll be posting more information as we get it to our website. But I found that kind of fascinating and alarming, especially as I get into further concerns. So I mentioned the host, but I haven't actually talked about the damage and what's the real problem here. So spotted lanternfly is a piercing sucking insect. So as many of you probably know, that means that they will essentially pierce into a plant and feed from it. So in this photo on the left, you can see weeping wounds caused by the piercing sucking behavior. And some of that also is the honeydew that they're producing, kind of weeping down the tree. And this photo on the right all that black city mold. So one of the biggest problems with spotted lanternfly is that they produce copious amounts of honeydew. I cannot stress that enough. You will be outside on a beautiful sunny day, and if you happen to have a tree that is infested with this insect, you will think it is raining for the amount of honeydew pouring down on you. It is disgusting. It's causing issues with landscapes. It's attracting stinging insects, wasps, and ants. It's making areas smell bad because honeydew is essentially sugar water. And that is, for lack of a better term, they are pooping sugar water everywhere. And so you can imagine that as it gets warmer, will start fermenting and just create a very gross smell just in the general areas. They're causing mold to grow on people's homes, their decks, their siding, on businesses. It's kind of an insane. I personally have never seen anything like this before with an insect at such a extreme degree. So here's another photo kind of zoomed out of that same area. So you can see all that black city mold and honeydew is causing the understory to start wilting. In this photo, you can see tons of adults on this tree of heaven. I've never tried counting how many are in this photo, but you can see there's a lot. And then I'm going to go ahead and play a video just kind of showing you a bit of that black city mold buildup. And this is on one single tree. So you imagine if this is a ton of trees in a landscape or along a residential road, it can get pretty bad pretty fast.
Have you guys seen it?
You'll see all the adults on the tree. You can see all that city mold build up at the base and on just the kind of debris nearby. I think the video pans up at the end.
Like, I don't know, adult trees, but.
And then right there at the end, you can see kind of all that wilting and, the way those understory plants are being affected. This photo I always include as an anecdotal story, but something for people to keep in mind. So this was taken again in Pennsylvania at a municipal facility where I don't remember what type of facility, but basically people who at the end of their day will take their trucks back and park them and then go home. So this person made the mistake of parking their truck up against a tree of heaven tree line, and that is the image of the vinyl covering on the truck bed. And every single one of those slats is honeydew that has been dropped down on the trucks. You can imagine just the nuisance level of this pest, and again, how disruptive and gross this is. And this person, in a sense, is, I guess, lucky that they had a vinyl bed covering. Imagine if they didn't, and there was actual stuff they needed in that truck, who knows? But again, I include this just to kind of give you an idea of how much honeydew these insects are producing and the levels that they produce it at. So again, just really driving the point home of that sooty mold buildup, same area. So this one, I mentioned the sooty mold a lot, but there's another thing that happens. Fungal mats will begin to form at the base of trees, which you can see in this photo on the right. And again, I'm just going to show a video giving you an idea of what this looks like. So all those adults. And kind of that black discoloration at the base of the tree beyond the fungal, that's all that honeydew that is just dropping down. I know I'm really trying to drive the point home of just how unpleasant this insect is and how much we do not want it to enter North Carolina and become established here. I mentioned the grasses. So this video just makes me laugh, but I always include it again, especially for a group like you guys and more of an urban setting. This was taken outside of a Target in Pennsylvania. So you're going to see there's adults feeding on grasses, which you would not think that they would want to feed on. They can't be getting much from it. And then it's going to zoom. And if you notice the sidewalk, all of those black discolorations are where spotted lanternflies have been smushed. And here, the person taking the video is going to try and step on one, but it hops away. The group that was taking this video and up there said that they were seeing spotted lanternflies inside the Target as well. They're climbing up buildings, businesses, you name it, they're there. If the infestation is present, you will know it. And then my last video, if I have not made the point clear about how bad the honeydew is just showing you how much it produces. You'll see right in the center, all of that coming down. That's just that honeydew production. So let's say that's one or two of them. Imagine if thousands of them are doing that at the same time. It can get bad really fast. And then I always like to end my damage stuff with these three photos just to really, this says a lot. So that photo on the left, of course, is the egg masses. That's on a birch tree. I can't remember. I want to say it's maybe around 70 to 100 egg masses. And if you recall at the beginning, each egg mass contains roughly 35 eggs. So you can do the math, and that's just one tree that egg masses have been laid on. And imagine if those egg masses had been laid on, let's say, camping equipment, and then someone moved that camping equipment. This pest can be moved really easily because of that. And when I get into the more regulatory stuff, I'll talk more about why that's such a big problem. That center photo is those 4 thin stars on Tree of Heaven. They're so bold and bright. As I said, they're pretty hard to miss if they're present. And then that third photo on the right, this is a cherry, I think it's maybe a plum tree in someone's backyard. And you can just see the sheer number of adults on that single tree. And at the base, this is ants that have been attracted from all that delicious sugar water coming down. But I mean, you can imagine little kids are present. They're not going to want to play outside in the summertime or any time when this is going on. It just really reduces the quality of life. Some of the anecdotal reports we're hearing from Pennsylvania is that homeowners are having difficulty selling their houses in the summertime because people who are going to do open houses don't want to be around this insect. And from a predatory side, it's been kind of fascinating to watch the various like pesticide companies and exterminator companies who are really taking advantage of the situation and coming up with kind of miracle cures. Weirdly, in a good sense, this pest is very easy to kill, but the problem is that it just produces so prolifically and it's so easy to spread the egg masses that it doesn't really matter that it's easy to kill because there's so many that if you kill one section, one population, there's another one, another 10, another 20 that are going to pop up somewhere. So yeah, it's just a major nuisance pest. In terms of what is being done about it, the researchers have been looking at different trap options. The first one they started with was the tree band. And that was semi-effective at first. There's been a lot of citizen science work with this. And in that photo on the left, those are all those early nymph stages that have been caught. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with tree bands. They do serve a good purpose, but the downside of them is that they get a lot of bycatch. So beneficial insects get stuck on them. Big animals, birds, snakes get stuck on them. And then there was issues in Pennsylvania of homeowners who were really, really getting into it and wanted to be involved. People were banding their trees from the base of the tree all the way up to as far as they could reach, which really is not the intended method. So a scientist then tried to look into bug barriers, which is essentially a tree band that's been inverted. So they use a little bit of like padding to separate the bug band or bug barrier from the tree, and the sticky stuff is on the inside. Those have been better, but unfortunately still have a lot of bycatch. So the current method that they're looking at and trying to use is the circle trap, which is essentially, as it looks like, it's a screen that's been stapled to a tree with just a container. It can be a container like this, a bag works too, at the top. These have been much, much more effective at catching spotted lanternfly. The problem is that production is slow. I think only just this last month have they been able to start mass producing these. And so we plan to use these here in North Carolina as a monitoring tool. These are definitely not a control. This is for monitoring purposes for the most part. And let me really quickly check. I think Leslie just popped up a chat question for me. So let me figure out where chat is. 1 second.
Yeah, Whitney, I was just going to bring your attention. I had someone call in with a question about saying if they're asking if there's any evidence or suspicion that the stress of a tree that a tree's under contributes to the attraction of the spotted lanternfly.
So that's a really good question. As far as I know, that is not an aspect. However, that is possible with the hot trees. I'm certain that something like that is being looked into, but with Tree of Heaven, no, it seems like it does not matter what status the Tree of Heaven is in, they will happily feed on it. But possibly I could see that maybe be an explanation for the hot tree phenomenon, that perhaps that one really, really attractive tree does have some form of damage and is sending out a signal. But unfortunately, no, it does not seem like that's been something that's been identified as a attractant to them yet. So yeah, good question. So let's see. The other main thing that's being done in the states dealing with populations of this pest is control and suppression. So unfortunately, we've already sailed well beyond the eradication, which is really sad. So right now, they're just trying to contain the problem. So what they're doing is the affected states are identifying Ailanthus populations where spotted lanternfly has been found, and trees that are identified as 6 inches or DBH or less are then treated with an herbicide. I think triclopyr, and I'm going to have to double check that, so do not quote me on that. Before I end today, I'll make sure I'm getting the right chemical name for that. Garlon is the name that I'm used to for it. But anyway, they're treated with an herbicide from April through October and just straight up killed. And then larger trees, 6 inches DBH or greater, are treated with an insecticide. They're basically considered trap trees. Since tree of heaven is so attractive to spotted lanternfly, the idea is essentially if we treat the tree with an insecticide and they come feed on it, then they'll die, which is working pretty well so far, at least in terms of control and suppression. They die almost instantly, and the treatment is good for a year, and they're using dinotefuran. So Safari works. The other one that's being heavily used is Transdect. And we already have a supply of the insecticide and the herbicide here in North Carolina, because our goal basically is if and when this pest is found here, we want to target it instantly. One of the reasons, unfortunately, that the pest has gotten a little out of control in some of the other states is a common issue between the feds, where the funding's coming from, and the states. Since this initially was not established in the United States, it's a federal issue, and so they rely on funding from the feds, but sometimes that's a slow process. And anyway, long story short, things have just gotten a little out of hand, and so everyone's doing the best they can to control it, and it remains to be seen long term how far and wide this pest will be able to spread. I will say we've been aware of it since 2014 and been actively looking, and thankfully have no reason to think it's here. So we're hoping all the education outreach is helping prevent it from entering the state, but you just never know. It's so easy for insects like this to accidentally get moved. So that leads me kind of to the more regulatory stuff. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So as I mentioned at the very start, it was first found in Pennsylvania in 2014 in Berks County, and that's this county here on the right. So originally it was found there, and it kind of spread in almost like a little like bullseye out from it. And it was found on stone tile products that were shipped in from Asia. The scary thing is that they traced it back to a 2012 shipment, which means that it was here for about 2 years before it was noticed, which again is true for many of our invasive insects. But it is alarming when you think, oh, could it be here in North Carolina and it's just not being noticed yet because the populations are really small? And yes, it's very, very likely. We hope it's not the case, but we can't rule it out entirely. 26 counties are now under quarantine in Pennsylvania. About 11 were added this March, especially those two, Allegheny and Beaver on the left side of the map. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for the annotation request. I did not know that was a feature. Let me see if I can use that. I'll circle. Berks County here. So, oops, I apologize. Now I'm just learning features of this app. So as I mentioned, it's spread into Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, and West Virginia. And you can see on this map, this one I always try to really do a good job explaining because this has caused a lot of confusion for a lot of people. If the county is filled in blue on this map, that means there's an active reproducing population of the insect. If the county is outlined in red, that means it's under quarantine. So you'll notice in Virginia and West Virginia, there's 2 counties that have reproducing populations but have not yet been quarantined. The issue there is that those are very new discoveries. Both of them were made in the last couple months, and sometimes quarantining can be a slow process. And unfortunately with spotted lanternfly, it's unclear if the quarantine's even effective. And on my next slide, next couple of slides, I'll explain why that is. The purple dots are the ones that I really want to highlight, because you will notice there's one in North Carolina in Buncombe County. And if I can figure out that annotation thing, I can show that. But down, Western North Carolina, where Asheville is. So those are all what we call regulatory incidents, which essentially means 1 or 2 insects was found, but it does not indicate an established population. So I'll talk about the Buncombe County one, since that affects us. That was reported to us by a business owner in Asheville who had received a shipment of supplies from a company in Pennsylvania, and he noticed an adult spotted lanternfly on one of the pallets that the materials came in on. And thankfully, he thought it looked weird. He did not know what it was. He Googled it and was able to figure out to report it. And so he reported it to us immediately. And we went out and investigated, and were convinced it was definitely just one single dead adult that managed to travel in on the stuff. We have surveyed the whole area. We have no reason to think that there were any live insects. However, upon interviewing this individual, he told us that basically when they're done with their pallets, they just put them outside and anyone's welcome to come get them, which is fine. And absolutely. The scary thing to me is, what if they were egg masses on those pallets? There very well could have been, and we have no way of tracking those. So that's kind of an example of how quickly this pest can spread without even realizing something very innocent can end up causing big problems. Now, in this case, there may not have been egg masses. It could completely be a non-issue, but we just don't know. And then, as I mentioned, as of this month, 12 states have had interceptions of spotted lanternfly. Not necessarily, again, established, but in some way, shape, or form, one of these life stages has been found. So Massachusetts, for example, in Boston, it was adults found in poinsettias around Christmas, things like that. So this list, I am not going to read the whole list. I have it here to give you an idea of the kinds of things that can move spotted lanternfly. So, you can kind of get a good idea of this. But the point I want to make is that spotted lanternfly can move on everything. So here in North Carolina, if you were doing business or working with someone from one of the affected states, inspect the material that you're bringing in, inspect the vehicles, the tools. You just never know. We just have to be vigilant and be paying attention to this. As I said, those egg masses are really cryptic and small, and they blend in really well. And so, just take a look at things, look them over. If you have concerns, you just call. Another thing that the other states are doing is the spotted lanternfly permit. And this is a requirement for the states that have spotted lanternfly, specifically the quarantined areas. Getting the permit is free, but people do have to take a little online class to do it. And the idea is that, say, a business owner or a manager would take the training, and then the onus is on them to train their staff. So here in North Carolina, if you, as urban foresters, I don't know if you either work with companies that do business in Pennsylvania, or you yourself have a company and you're doing some type of work. Essentially, you need to have one of these permits. Everyone who does any type of work at all, like if you say drive a vehicle, like a work vehicle, not a personal one, into one of these areas, you do need to have this permit. They have civil and criminal penalties, but they haven't actually enforced any of it yet. So far, over 1 million of these permits have been issued, and I think all 50 states, at least one person in all 50 states has obtained one of these permits, and there's people in Canada that have it. So the way to learn more about the permitting, if this does apply to you, is you can visit any of the respective Department of Agriculture websites for the states that you might be doing business in or working with, and you can find the training very easily on their websites if you type in, say, for example, Pennsylvania Department of Ag spotted lanternfly. And I'd be happy to answer more questions about that at the end. And I also saw another question, so let me just make sure it's not one that needs to be addressed. Let's see, chat. That is a very good question. Bill Grubbs asked a question about whether this insect is on the whole trunk or just the bottom 12 feet. I am going to address that in just a moment. That is an excellent question, so hold that thought. So I mentioned a few slides back whether they're looking into whether Tree of Heaven is required for SLF to complete its life cycle. Signs point to probably yes, but we don't know yet. I'm really hoping this is the year. They've been doing solid research for about 4 years now, so I feel like this is the year that we might really get an answer to that, and I have high hopes. They're looking into biology and behavior of the pest. So these photos I thought were really cool. Again, this is in Pennsylvania. A birder was out at night with a thermal camera doing birding and happened to notice these weird glows on this tree. And it turns out spotted lanternfly, I guess, lights up under thermal imagery. So I don't really know what the implications for that could be, but the researchers are really excited by this discovery and are hoping to maybe figure out some way to use this as a survey method. So that's being looked into. And then tall object attraction. So that's the question that I just got asked was a perfect segue into this. The female spotted lanternfly, when they lay their eggs, 85% or more of their eggs are laid 9 meters or higher on the trees. So this is alarming to us as surveyors because the egg masses are so hard to see. And if they're 9 meters or higher, you have to have binoculars and you have to even know you're looking for that. As for the adults themselves, once they hatch, they will be over the entire tree from base of the trunk all the way up. They'll be on the branches. The adults will also hang out on just about anything. All life stages are really good at clinging, for lack of a better term. I have heard reports of a living adult, clinging to a car going 60 miles per hour down the road. So they can be kind of everywhere. But yes, in terms of the trees, a lot of those photos showed the adults kind of hanging out the base. I'm not really sure why they were specifically doing that, but no, you can find the adults from top to bottom. The tall object attraction, they're looking at trying to understand the egg laying behavior, because finding out that 85% or more of the egg masses are laid 9 meters or higher, that really changes how we're going to survey for this pest. And they did that study in Virginia by cutting down affected Tree of Heaven and breaking the trunk up into sections and then counting the egg masses on each section. So it's really interesting. And again, hopefully we'll have more about that in months to come. I've already covered the traps. The point here is that right now they're using something called methyl salicylate in the traps, which is just, I think it's a chemical maybe produced by Tree of Heaven. But ideally, as probably many of you know, it's really, really hard to know where true populations of a pest are and then control and potentially eradicate without a pheromone lure. So they're working really hard on seeing if they can develop a pheromone lure. One of the reasons gypsy moth has been such an effective, there's been such an effective control and suppression of that pest is because we've isolated the pheromone for gypsy moth. So we really have high hopes for that for this pest as well. And then the last kind of main thing that researchers are working on is biological control studies. Pesticides, they work great, but we don't want to use them in too high numbers. And so we're looking at natural options. There's certainly predators. There's that great photo of a praying mantis feeding on an adult. Spiders, there's some assassin bugs, some stink bugs being looked at. There's some fungal pathogens. Beauveria bassiana is the main one that's being looked at right now and seems to be pretty good at controlling it. And that's naturally occurring in our soil here in North Carolina and a lot of places. So that is very promising. And then there's a couple parasitoids being looked at, Anastatus orientalis and Dryanus sinicus. One of those is native to Asia, and then the other one is actually a parasitoid being used for gypsy moth as well. So there's a lot of comparisons to gypsy moth despite being widely different pests. But I'll be interested to see kind of where those go. And then for what we're doing here in North Carolina, so I've talked a lot about what the other states are doing. We, at the moment, because we don't know that we have it, are mostly spending an inordinate amount of time surveying for Tree of Heaven, which I kind of laugh when I talk about because, again, if any of you know Tree of Heaven, it's everywhere. We might as well survey where it's not found. We have really been able to determine Tree of Heaven is much more heavily focused on the western part of the state. Seems like when you look at I-95, you won't find very much of Tree of Heaven east of I-95, but you'll start to see a ton of it west of I-95. However, that China berry is found much more prevalently east of I-95. And if that is one of its key hosts, it's hard to say. We're, of course, also looking for light stages of spotted lanternfly throughout the year. We're surveying state parks, rest areas, rail yards, hardscape businesses, cities, big tourist hotspots. We really think the probably main avenue this pest might come in is through just movement of tourists, camp equipment, what have, you name it. So we're just doing a lot of outreach. Of course, this talk that I'm giving right now is an example of that. We got to spread the word far and wide. The best is to have a ton of eyes out looking at the same time, and hopefully we'll catch it early. We have developed posters, which you may have seen. We've tried to get them spread far and wide in the state. So they're very basic. Have you seen it? Do you know what Tree of Heaven is? Have you moved it? The Have You Moved It poster we have up at every rest area in the state. Department of Transportation was really nice letting us do that and helping us with that. The middle poster and the left poster we have up at every extension office, every Forest Service office, schools, museums, places like that. And we have a ton of these posters. If any of you are interested in them, I'd be happy to get them out to you. We have other outreach swag as well. If you have any events that you plan to be attending or whatnot, we have these really interesting little pins, writing pins that have, I should have included a photo of it, but it's a little pull-out scroll that has the life cycle of spotted lanternfly. So anyway, we'd be happy to get that kind of stuff out to you. But in terms of reporting it, kind of my last big slide on spotted lanternfly, we have developed an email just for this purpose. This may end up being something we didn't need to do, but up in Pennsylvania, they've gotten so many reports once it became established that they had to establish a specific hotline for it. So we try to kind of preemptively prepare for this. So badbug@ncagr.gov is our spotted lanternfly reporting tool. If you are out doing your jobs and you think you're seeing it, feel free to please take a photo and send it to that bad bug email. And if you genuinely think you have it, you can also call me. My contact will be at the end of this presentation. But we're just trying to spread the word far and wide right now and really make sure people are on the lookout for this, because the last thing we want is it getting fully established in our state, especially in our residential areas or on our forests too. Anywhere, it would just be bad. So I'm actually going to make a little segue before we end the talk. Let me check my time. Good. Okay. I want to talk really briefly about Asian longhorned beetle. And the reason for this is because, unfortunately, it was just found in South Carolina just over a week ago. And it wasn't just a single adult or life stage found. It looks like it's established in this one area, which is very alarming because for all of you who know about Asian longhorned beetle, prior to now, it's only been a kind of northeastern United States problem. So just in case there's people on this talk who are not aware of it, I just wanted you all to be on the lookout because ALB is definitely an urban forest problem, 100%. And like spotted lanternfly, we do not want it here. So as again, with many of our invasives, it is native to Asia. It was first detected in the United States in 1996 in Brooklyn, New York, and it has been found in other parts of New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Ohio, and of course, South Carolina. It doesn't have quite as broad of a host range as something like spotted lanternfly, but it still has a wider host range than, say, emerald ash borer. Maples is the major concern for Asian longhorned beetle, but they've been found feeding on box elder, horse chestnut, buckeye, birch, willow, elm, occasionally on mimosa, ash, and poplar. So those are kind of the key trees to be on the lookout for. In terms of signs and symptoms, egg niches is one of the first things you might notice, and they essentially look like little spots on the tree where bark has been kind of chewed away. And that's just where an adult has laid a single egg. And so on that top photo, you'll see adult surrounded by little egg niches. Sometimes you might see frass appearing out. That's then evidence of the larval feeding underneath the bark. If you were to peel back bark, you might actually see evidence of the tunneling, or if it's, say, a broken branch on the ground, it's more easy to peel back, you might see that. That's the larvae on the top and the adult feeding on the bottom. They form perfectly round exit holes, and that is definitely a key feature for this. And the exit holes are relatively big. They can be between 3/8 to 5/8 of an inch. And as I said, perfectly round. So I included the photo of the pencil, A, to show you about the size, but also carpenter bees will make similar holes. They tend to go in and down, whereas Asian longhorn beetle goes straight in. So the pencil kind of helps you know if you're not quite sure. A pencil is like a nice way to be like, oh, this is going straight in, or if you try to put it in and it won't go any further, that might be a carpenter bee. Of course, the signs of decline are going to include early yellowing of leaves. So this was taken, I believe this is from Pennsylvania. But earlier in the year, you've got, leaf dieback, yellowing of leaves, branches might be dropping, things like that. And then in terms of how to actually identify the insect, it's very large. So the larvae, which you'll less rarely see unless you're actively working with a declining tree. They're about 2.5 inches in length. They're pretty much just creamy white, but they will have kind of a brown plate on the, it's the first segment of the thorax, but it's close to the head for those of you who aren't as comfortable with insect terminology. The adult itself, again, pretty large. It can be up to 1.5 inches in length. The reason it's called a longhorn beetle is because its antennae are really long, sometimes as long as, if not longer than the entire body. And they've got kind of a red and black banding on the antennae. And then the beetle itself, it's very pretty. It's like a nice kind of shiny black with white spots on it. And the insect that you're most likely to get confused with Asian longhorn beetle here in North Carolina is the white-spotted pine sire. So it looks very similar to the layperson. I could see why someone would think it's the same thing. But one key feature that you guys can all look at is this little white spot. It's called the scutellum. But the area between the base of the wings, Asian longhorn beetle, it's black. White-spotted pine sire, it's white. And so that's a really quick and easy way to differentiate the two if you might see it and you're not sure. But again, we don't know that this occurs in North Carolina. We have no reason to think it's here. So if you think that you might have it or see it, especially when you're out doing your jobs, please let us know, because this is another one we're going to need to deal with rapidly before it can, become established and spread in our state. So I realize I've covered a whole bunch of stuff, but I'd be happy to take questions. I know I've gotten a couple more in since I was talking. So thank you all, and I'm happy to take any and all questions. Oops, let me leave that up and get the chat back.
Yeah, great. That was wonderful. Did you get questions directly sent to you, Whitney, or?
I see a couple of questions. Yes.
Okay. So one came through just to me, asking about does imidacloprid control spotted lanternfly?
I think it does, because as I said, just about anything kills spotted lanternfly. I mean, soap and water will kill it. The problem is the label. So right now, and I don't think this has changed recently, so I can double check this, but since spotted lanternfly is so new, it's not on most pesticide labels. And so there's a special label for states that are affected by this, for dinotefuran specifically. I don't know if imidacloprid has the special label yet. But then again, that's also for treating larger areas and for the state using it. I don't know if it would have the same implications for, let's say, a homeowner using it. For urban foresters, that would be, I'd have to look into that. But yes, in terms of control, I feel pretty certain imidacloprid would control it, because pretty much everything controls it. And here in North Carolina, as I said, we've got the chemical and we will be allowed to use it if and when the pest arrives here. But we're not going to pre-treat the trees on the off chance. We're going to kind of a wait and see at the moment, but we're doing the best we can to at least really learn where the populations of tree of heaven are, especially around our hot commodities that we're very concerned about. Our wine industry we're very concerned about. Christmas trees could be a problem, not because they actually feed on Christmas trees, they don't feed on conifers, but those egg masses could be a major regulatory issue. And there's a question about the posters. Yes, I would be happy to share the posters with South Carolina as well. I can send the digital files if that would be easier. I see your email right there, so I'd be happy to do that if you'd like. And yes, egg masses can be crushed and or scraped off surfaces, absolutely. I had not covered that, in part because we want to absolutely know where spotted lanternfly is. So yes, if you see it, you can scrape it, but don't dispose of it yet, because we need to confirm that it actually is spotted lanternfly here in North Carolina. But if you're happen to be up visiting one of the other areas that's under quarantine, you see it. By all means, egg scraping is 100% one of the best ways, because get rid of those eggs and they can't produce. But yes, they can literally just put in a Ziploc bag full of alcohol. So thank you for that comment. That's
Okay, yeah, so we've got plenty of time for questions. We have about another 15 minutes or so. So now's the time to ask Whitney all of her expertise and knowledge about this bug, as well as the Asian longhorned beetle. Just type it into the chat box. You can send it to everybody or directly to Whitney or myself. If for some reason the chat box isn't working for you, because I've had a couple people had that issue with that, just send me an email. I'm kind of keeping an eye on that as well. And go from there. But I did have one question about the Asian longhorn while people are typing up questions. I worked in New York City for a while, and they had Asian longhorn up there for a long time, and we found them on London plane tree up there in the Bronx. Is there any indication that it would be found on like sycamores and that kind of stuff down this way?
Definitely possible. When I was pulling together the information for the pest alert last week, I found a USDA document that said it listed the plane tree and sycamore as questionable hosts. And having not been personally, like I'm aware of Asian longhorn beetle, but I've never actually worked with it before. I wasn't sure what questionable meant, and so I didn't include it. I didn't include any of the questionable hosts because I just didn't know. I think that meant like it's only been found on one or two of those species, as opposed to we find it on people all the time. But yes, Leslie, I would expect it to certainly be able to attack sycamore down here if it's a plane tree. But I have a suspicion based on my understanding that you've worked with it, so I feel like you would know more. That if maple's present or one of those other preferred hosts, it'll selectively choose those prior to choosing maybe like a plane tree or sycamore.
It did. We found it up there in the Bronx. We would see it first on all the maples, but when we had London plane tree planted intermixed on a street that had a lot of silver maples and Norway maples, we always found it on the plane tree as well. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, then yes, in the situation that would make sense to me, and I could certainly see it happening here. I just got asked, how are they gaining control of ALB in South Carolina? Excellent question. I know right now the main thing they're doing is trying to figure out how widespread the infestation is. It was discovered based on a homeowner report. I will admit I was tied up last week with gypsy moth treatment, so I have not followed South Carolina's response that closely, and I apologize for that. But I imagine they're trying to basically do a delimit survey right now, which is essentially determining how widespread the problem is, and then they're going to go in and figure out some sort of control with my specific expectation.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to say quickly, I've had a great experience this past week with myself and Chris Fry, who is a county ranger. We're part of an urban forest strike team deployment to Virginia and part of a survey team to survey for Ailanthus.
Oh, cool.
And assist them with identifying places where they could then conduct their herbicide treatments or pesticide treatments and trap trees. So that was a great experience. It was a great use, I think, of the urban forest strike team, which is kind of outside of what we do, which is post-storm response, assessing trees for risk and FEMA mitigation. So to throw that out there.
That's wonderful to hear. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? We still have some time here. I will draw attention to Whitney's email and phone number at the bottom of the slide here. You can make note and reach out to her with any specific questions, or if you do think you might encounter it. Whitney, while people are, we had a question come in from Mark asking if you could seek control of the lanternfly with the least toxic chemical versus one that is toxic to bees.
So that's a tricky one to answer. Yes, I would say for homeowners, absolutely choosing the soap and water method would be much, much preferred. When we're dealing with wide scale populations, the method of treatment of injecting the trees directly with the dinotefuran has proven to be the most effective. I don't think an injection, it probably would not have the same mass control measure to simply use the soap and water, because what they're doing, I said injection, I did not mean that. I meant a bark spray. They spray the trunk with dinotefuran. Yes, in an ideal world, absolutely. I will say that they have done a huge environmental assessment, and it's looking really good long-term for this not being a long-term effect on honeybees and other at-risk insects. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. In an ideal world, we would not be using anything that could harm honeybees. The problem is that this is such a out-of-control pest that the soap and water on a wide scale probably would not be effective. I hope that kind of answers that. And again, we haven't done any of this here in North Carolina, and this is all based on our understanding of how the other states are handling this insect.
Yeah, I got a follow-up question to that came through on my end, asking what ratio of soap to water would you recommend for that kind of treatment?
That's a really good question, and unfortunately, I would be guessing if I had to say. I would imagine. Well, I probably shouldn't even try to answer, because it would just be a complete and utter guess. I do know. Yeah, I don't know. I apologize. I can try to find out. So if whoever asked that wants to give me their email, I would be happy to try and find the answer and get it to you.
I'll get that to you, Whitney. He's been having a little bit of technical issues, but I'll forward his contact information to you so you can follow up with him. And he also asked another question about for spotted lanternfly: is it impacted at all with cold weather, as far as cold winters or snow?
Actually, yes. Weirdly, it seems like it might need a cold cycle to complete its life cycle, which could bode well for us here in North Carolina, since we don't get as cold. Now, our mountains could again still be at higher risk because it's the mountains and they have a much colder winter than we do here in the Piedmont and coastal regions. Again, sadly, it's not known 100% for certain, but it does seem like that kind of, I think, a good cold period is part of the life cycle for spotted lanternfly. That's what early research is showing. So hopefully good news for us, at least semi-good news, but sadly still a little too early to know for sure.
Good. All right, we can allow a few more minutes for questions to come in. And while that's happening, Whitney, can you unshare so I can take it back over just to kind of close stuff out as